we present diversity, diverse content, diverse performers when it comes to race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity. So I'm very interested in these conversations. I'm really excited to bring up Brickson Diamond today. I met Brickson through an organization we're both involved in called NationSwell, which is leaders across the country working on social issues in the private sector, in the public sector, in the nonprofit sector. And I'm excited to hear him talk about diversity in the mainstream entertainment industry and what that means for us in the adult industry. So please give Brickson a hand.
Skipping those stairs.
I'm not, I have a skirt.
All right, well, I didn't wear a skirt today, so I can skip the stairs. Thanks for having me, Michelle, especially for inviting me on your first trip around with this group. So I'll try not to ruin it for you. What I'm going to do today is really start out with some stories, because I think storytelling is what we're all in the business of doing, no matter where we are in the industry, and drive you through some thinking of what I've done. So before I start, I will tell you one story about me. So I had no business in entertainment at all. I used to work in the investment business, and I found that people ran from me at cocktail parties, so I had to figure out some way to make myself more interesting. An independent film was the way I did that. And I'll tell you the story of that in a moment, but really it was this notion of living in Hollywood, working in investments, not interesting, let's change that. So there is change possible for all of us. We're gonna get started here with a flashback to 2015, which unfortunately I did this deck last week and it could have been this week. You all saw the Oscar nominations. You've heard the buzz. In 2015, April Rain created a hashtag just casually called Oscars So White, which lamented the lack of representation in the nominations in the Oscars from people of color. Mind you, this was the year that Selma and The Equalizer came out. The Academy loves Denzel Washington, right? To have a year where you don't nominate Denzel is just sort of like a crazy thing to go off the rails. So that's the sort of flashback to what was going on. And what resulted from that was really, this year, BAFTA's So White seemed like the relevant thing, but now you flash forward to the Academy Award Challenge, and today they're having that same issue and concern. So I'm going to drive you through this story of carrots and sticks. That's what we're talking about today. Diversity is really a story about carrots and sticks, both rewards and punishments. And so I want you all to take this ride with me in this adventure, because we're going to do a few things here. We're going to go through this story of irrelevance. So the first thing I'm going to do is scare you. Get ready to be frightened to death. Then I'm going to tell you some stories and a case study that gives you some hope and some perspective on how we can all navigate a way through a pathway that I follow to create more diversity in our space. And then finally, it's going to be about you all. And I'm going to engage you, and I'm going to need you all to get ready, to put your hands up and to get involved, to talk about how it applies to the adult entertainment business, right? Stretching our thinking, going out on a limb, and really taking the tools that we would have gotten after being terrified to go forward. We ready?
Ready.
Good. That's pretty good. I was going to harass you about not being loud enough, but that was good. All right, so let's get on into this. If I can get a little, there we go. Irrelevance is looming. That is the theme of the day, the scary part of this talk, is that we're all racing up against irrelevance in every part of our lives and our work. And I think all of us understand that in this business. Every year, you think about what you used to have when you were a kid, right? You think about the things that you most value. Just close your eyes and think about the things that you most value in terms of entertainment. One of the things that I've always valued is music. And growing up, the boombox was the relevant tool, right? So you had your little cassette tapes, and you put them in your boombox, and you drove that on. So I'm giving you a little bit of dating of me, of cassette tapes. Well, you flash forward today, no one has boomboxes, no one has cassette tapes, dead. DVDs, dead. MP3s actually on an individual device that you have to download from your computer, remember that? Dead, right? Spotify is the tool of the day. Spotify, I embarrassed myself, Pandora.
I love Pandora.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate that. And so does Pandora. But they wish you would subscribe and not listen to the ads. So Pandora, and then today you have things like Tencent, right? Which are totally taking over the music space. Tencent did an initial public offering this past year with their 800 million unique monthly active users in China. By the way, Tencent Music is actually profitable, unlike Spotify. Right? Crazy. I know someone is like, profitable? How does that work in music? And they just had an IPO which raised them $1.1 billion, placing them at a valuation of $21.3 billion. Then, just to wrap out the end of 2019, they went out and bought 10% of Universal Music Group. They're taking over music. Talk about irrelevance, right? Think about if you're stuck in the days of CDs or even MP3s. You're just not even keeping up is the challenge. Every year before this job, which now I advise companies on how to find diverse talent at senior levels and then how to keep them, is the work that I do in terms of shifting culture for inclusion. And inclusion is a bit different than diversity. Diversity is inviting me to the party. Inclusion is playing music I want to dance to and serving food I want to eat. Right? Get the difference there? So I talked to this group that I worked for 5 years. I was a member of a group of Black executives from around the country. And we did a conference where we sat down with, that's me in a suit and tie, with 900 mid-level managers from around the country. These are folks who were probably 5 or 6 reporting levels away from the enterprise-wide CEO of Fortune 500 companies. So I sat with them every year. We talk about issues affecting their careers and how they can be more effective executives. And a lot of what we do in our training across this program is around relationships, right? So we can all think about how we're taught about business growing up. I'm going to be really bold here. I'm guessing none of your parents were in the adult entertainment industry. Is that right? So you can't go to them and ask them for advice on how to manage the issues in your business. Am I still on track here? Right? Well, some of you can, but that's an interesting story. I may finish early, we get to that. But imagine the whole world of business is like that for you. There's no one in your family you can go to talk about these issues. There's no one you can go to when there is a crisis in the database for testing and screening that's going to impact your set right now, right? Everything is brand new for you. And so for so many folks who are first-gen college students, first-gen in major corporations, there's nobody they can go to ask questions, right? The things that we take for granted in business every day, they have no context for it. And so every year we bring them together and we spend a day and a half talking about how to advance their careers. There are other programs that we do that spend either 3 days or 5 days diving into some of these issues, but really helping them move beyond not just what the physical barriers are to their success, but also the mental, right? Because again, if you're new to this industry, you have no reference, you have no frame and no one to help you, everything is a huge obstacle, right? Most of all, your own fear. So, one of the highlights of my 2018 presentation was the irrelevance question that I talked to you all about. And so, the conversation starts with no industry is immune. And I go around, I ask them what industries they're in, and then I try to magically come up with the threats of irrelevance coming to their industry. Energy, net zero emissions is a huge threat to that industry, right? You think about anything, name an industry and I'll do the trick now. Name an industry and we'll try to figure out what's its biggest threat. Restaurants, quick serve, and Uber Eats, right? Come on. Easy, Michelle. Who's got another one? Wall Street. So you think about sort of the TD America trading and all those commercials you get, I can do it on my own. And not just that, by the way, I will not reveal the name, but I got a LinkedIn message today from a college classmate who said that they had been laid off from their Wall Street job because of shrinking margins. And so they are moving lots of the work to algorithms to do all those models. The modeling that analysts famously work 80 hours to do, irrelevant, right? They can do a model, they can get it through, the margins are compressing because people are paying less for those services. One more, make it good. Healthcare. You have mobile doctor visits now that totally give you the footprint issues, which then reflect on real estate. That's a huge threat for real estate in terms of the medical space. Insurance companies, they get more nationalized in terms of even malpractice. There are all these sort of impacts that you get. I was on a call just before we walked in, talking to an investor, a venture capital firm, a social justice venture capital firm, talking about healthcare plans and healthcare providers in Massachusetts, and the fact that large players were helped by ACA, but the smaller players with the compliance issues have been squeezed out. So in every situation, there's irrelevance looming large at every turn. But the secret for those 900 mid-level managers, maybe for you too, is thinking about how you build your capacity. How do you master your space? How do you think about a practice of innovation? How do you always stay on top so that you are ahead of the game? But in addition to that is exercising your capability. So there's capacity, which is your ability to do something, and your capability, which is actually sort of getting it done in my frame. So it's a communications approach. How do you talk to people? How do you drive that forward? Building influence. Again, that relationship piece is critically important for these mid-level managers. And then how do you use it? Now this mid-level piece can apply to anybody in your organizations that's not in the senior role, but also to the talent, right? Who may not be specially equipped with the skills and tools that you all are using to run the business. This is really a notion of a scary walk down a path that I think we're all traversing in terms of irrelevance. And it shifts in landscape. And who here believes that your landscape in the adult entertainment business is shifting?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we all agree? We're in. All right, easy slide, moving through. So it's feverish work to stay ahead, right? And these are just clips from some of the sessions that I was able to look at off the website for this conference, right? Thinking about virtual vibrancy, elevating VR, content monetization, thinking about camming, and bricks to clicks, the retail to that question about the restaurants, right? How do you drive in this fast-moving space where there's just change, it's just feverish, and it's nonstop, and it's maddening. I planned to start and I forgot, it's amazing that in 16 days we moved from this is gonna be the best decade ever, go 2020, to make it stop. Right? How is it only the middle of January? It feels like it must be September, right? It's just going so fast. Let's talk about a case study though, and this is from my world, trying to be relevant and trying to be entertaining at cocktail parties. And this is the model. So if you're keeping notes, this is the big gift. Find a rich space. In my case, it was a Sundance Film Festival. I went for 2 years with friends and really marveled at the fact that there were incredible stories being told, incredible careers being built, incredible amount of money being made. I saw Hustle and Flow. You remember Hustle and Flow? It's hard out here for a pimp. You know the end of the story, particularly relevant for this crowd. But the story is about a pimp in, I think, St. Louis or someplace in the Midwest who is trying to be a rapper. Right? I'm watching this movie in a gymnasium, a high school gym. They're literally like basketball hoops pushed up. I've never been to Sundance before. People are running up and down the aisles in the middle of the movie. I have no idea what's going on. By the time the cast gets on stage, which includes Terrence Howard, Oscar nominated for his portrayal, Taraji Henson, Oscar nominated for her portrayal, the producer who second mortgaged her house for the finishing funds, who is this year producing the Oscars, and the director got up in tears because the cast had never seen the finished film before and announced that they had sold the movie before the credits rolled for $10 million to MTV, breaking a Sundance record. Pretty amazing. I was in. Yes, let's do this all the time. Looking around outside of the festival and outside of the theater, that little gymnasium, it was a white tundra. Y'all get the double on top. So it was just whiteness everywhere, right? There was just no diversity anywhere. And I was like, where are the black people? I don't understand it, right? So I looked around for the missing players. And that is a picture of the Sundance landscape in Park City. That is both figurative and literal, how it looked at Sundance in 2005. And then I found a model that worked, right? I walked around in the Queer Lounge, that is my representation of the Queer Lounge, yes, it's hokey, was a space that had created a landing pad for LGBTQIA+, filmmakers and community, where they could just get some coffee, get in out of the cold, commune together, listen to education around the notion of creating independent films, selling it, making money, and not waiting tables all your life, right? This was an incredible opportunity and space that they created. And quite frankly, quite literally, we just stole it. All right, we went in and we said we're gonna replicate this for black people and we're gonna call it something very subtle, Black House. Why be creative when you can just go straight ahead, right? And the results for us are here. This is really tiny, so you can't read it, but I'll tell you what the story is. This is the Hollywood Reporter giving a little bit of feedback on the Black House coming out in 2007. Fast forward 2 years, we got to Sundance, rented a space, 8 days just off Main Street. We're official sponsors of Sundance. So we went out and raised money to do all this and gave some of it back to Sundance to be official, so we wouldn't be guerrilla. There were 7 black films in the Sundance Film Festival in 2007. Roughly 120 films playing over 10 days. 7 with either a black director, a black story, and we are super generous with up to a third lead black. So Danny Glover's in your movie, we count. Right? Just 7 out of 120. Again, a rich space. That was our first location, right off Main Street. You see how big that sign is relative to the building? Everyone who had to drive by there to get into the Main Street area. Missing Players, that's a party we had for Tracy Edmonds, Our Stories Films. Bob Johnson was her backer. So our first time there at Sundance, we had a party for Tracy Edmonds, ex-wife of Babyface Edmonds, producer behind Soul Food. In attendance was Bob Johnson, the co-founder of BET. Diddy, depending on your age, you call him Diddy Puppy Sean or something else. Nelly, who came with a tour bus and asked me where to put it. Don't know, it's Park City, St. Louis maybe, back at home. And 3 6 Mafia, who won the Academy Award for what song?
Yes. The Hustle and Flow song.
Which is?
I don't remember. But
It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp.
Okay.
Come on, that was the beginning, right? So this is amazing. It was this full circle moment for us in creating Black House, right? And it was a model that worked. We had panels, we had conversations. Okay, really, we just had parties. We had 2 panels, they were back to back, and the number of audience members just outnumbered the number of panelists. On that couch, you can't see him, it's Henry McGee, who was the president of HBO Home Entertainment for 25 years, right? So we were like, we're gonna build this, it's gonna go. Just saying to Sundance, if you build it, they will come. And to steal a line from Spike Lee, why aren't any of my pictures on these walls? That was the model, that was the missing space, the place of missing players, and the rich space. And we repeated it. We took it to the Tribeca Film Festival. We took it to the Cannes Film Festival. We took it to LA Film Fest. Pour some out for LA Film Fest because it's no longer around. We took it to Toronto International Film Festival. And we brought it again and again to AFI Fest, right? Creating space in these elite mainstream festivals for black folks and other people of color to come in, to be present, to see what's going on, to learn how to tell their stories, make money, and build careers. What's been the result? This year, 8-day countdown. Feel free to follow us on _Black House on all social media platforms around the world and all universes. 4 days of Black House, 55 films, episodic, VR, and performance projects in the festival this year. Pretty amazing, right? From 7 to 5 in 13 years. And we're firmly rooted in a world beyond film. I think that's been the key for relevance for Sundance, is they haven't said, we are a film festival and we will do nothing else. As television became to get more prominent, they went to an episodic space. As VR started to dawn, they really dove deeply into VR. The performance space, the labs around playwrights, all those pieces help to keep Sundance relevant, but it's important that it also connects them to people of color. Those are critical lines of defense against that thing of relevance. This is a super specific reference coming up. And this is from 1990, and when I think about VR and its impact on the adult entertainment business, I think about this reference. Are you all ready?
Ready.
Super specific. Digital underground, sex packets. Who knows what I'm talking about? Just raise your hand. All right. So Sex Packets is off of Digital Underground's album. The Humpty Dance, anyone remember the Humpty Dance? That may give you a little more access to this group. So Sex Packets is this notion of somebody takes a packet and it puts them in this immersive experience of adult engagement. Why I feel to censor myself, I don't know, but I am. Adult engagement, or in Eddie Murphy parlance, relations with the person of their choice. You pick the packet, and then you have this adult experience with the person of your choice. And it's tremendously immersive. not the word we used in 1990. And that's the story. This is VR, people. Digital Underground was talking about VR and AR in 1990. Okay? Black people are magic. Okay. So this is the big finish, and this is where you all get into the conversation. Thinking about how you avoid the scary relevance, because it's a carrot or a stick, right? Either it's a carrot because they're great markets, I'm talking about in a moment, or it's a stick, you get yourself into ridiculous trouble, right? And before I go to this step and get you all engaged, the way to get out and stay out of ridiculous trouble around race issues is to have people who look different around the table. Can I say it again? The way to get out of stay out of difficult race problems is have people of color at the table. I'm not even gonna say it one more time. What I'm gonna say is something different, and they have to have a voice. Just having them in the room is not enough. Because if they're just in the room without space for a voice, number one, you're still gonna be in trouble, and it's gonna be even worse. Because you had them there and you didn't use them, and people were like, well, what was that about? And even more important, if they don't have a voice, there are probably other people in the room at that table who don't feel like they have a voice, right? It's not that diversity and inclusion are separate, right? The inclusion piece is critically important because in our organizations where diversity is low, both in terms of number and in terms of participation, it's about the fact that the conditions have been created in such a way that many people feel on the outside. And the work I do in my firm is really around creating cultures where everyone feels the ability to speak up and to be engaged and to be invested. And I don't do that out of the goodness of my heart, quite honestly. I do it because I want to make people money, right? And there is money in diversity. Diversity is good business. You ready to jump in? Yep. All right, let's do this. Anyone know who this is? John Dillinger. Why did John Dillinger rob banks?
That's where the money is.
That's where the money was, right? Diversity matters, and your diverse markets are vibrant. Women and people of color. I'm no expert, but I've heard a lot of the understanding of the fact that there was this notion that women did not buy porn, right? But as you've gotten personal devices and personal access, those numbers have been rebuffed, right? There is a vibrant market for women in adult entertainment, right? People of color. I don't know if you all, now you're being chased off of every platform there is, so Tumblr is no longer the spot, sort of, because of their restrictions, but Twitter is now this vibrant place where people of color are really building significant opportunities for themselves in adult entertainment, right? Fans only spaces, but driving there is this great place to attract audiences and monetize, right? And people of color are killing it. And this is why, right? So the women piece I won't touch, but the people of color I will completely dive into. We as people of color, particularly black folks, over-index on mobile devices, entertainment content consumption, and social platform engagement. Who's heard of Black Twitter, right? Black Twitter is a thing, it is vibrant, and it is driving dollars. $1.3 trillion in spend from the African American community in 2018, right? And so that is a lot of digital dollars that are being missed from people in their most intimate, close spaces. Conventional wisdom says, stick with what you got. If it's making money, don't give it up, right? I'm gonna ride this horse until it collapses. My guess is that the fact that you are in this room and in this business means that you defy conventional wisdom. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah.
It's reasonable, certainly, right? So let's talk about it. Diversity has been good for music, right? Think about the origins of rock and roll. Think about the vibrancy of jazz. Think about hip hop, which wasn't gonna last, right? Diversity has been good for music. Agreed?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been good for sports, right? Diversity has been good for sports, from Michael Jordan to Steph Curry, to the Williams sisters here from LA. I forgot to mention this is my hometown, not because I was born here, because I chose it. I live in West Hollywood. The number of hotels in this town is ridiculous, and it's our primary source of income, so thank you. The sales tax and the occupancy taxes on these hotels On the Oscar night, we go back to that, these hotels will be filled with parties, right? Filled with parties, and that's a vibrant part of this economy. We want to make sure that people have diversity in those parties, and those people will be lots of musicians and athletes. But to drive this point home, even superhero business has been enhanced by diversity, right? Captain Marvel, Black Panther, I could go on and on. All these businesses have been enhanced by diversity. Don't be afraid. It's working for people. It's working for them in the billions and billions of dollars. Defying conventional wisdom means having people of color on air, behind the camera, and at the decision-making tables, right? Critically important across those three spectrums. That's really what we're driving for today and thinking about. And here's the big idea from Steve Jobs, late Steve Jobs. A lot of people in our industry haven't had diverse experiences. Can I say that again? A lot of people in our industry have not had diverse experiences. So they don't have enough dots to connect. And they end up with very linear solutions without a broad perspective on the problem. The broader one's understanding of the human experience, the better design we will have. Now, I often hear the refrain, diversity of thought is what we're going for, which is not wrong. But in addition to diversity of thought, we need the underpinning of diversity of experience, right? Lived experience. The stories that are getting told in your content, that have them resonate with various audiences, require people who have been in the audiences that you're trying to target. We've already identified this great land of opportunity in terms of diverse audience. On camera, behind the camera, at the decision-making table, helping to think about the world that we're trying to exhibit, but also tap for money, right? Monetization. Let's think about this again, because I want to dive in with you all. We talked about irrelevance. We've talked about the fact that it's looming, it's coming, there's no avoiding it. We talked about the case study, and I'm going to dive into that with you all to hopefully have you all help me think about how it can work for you all in your businesses. And so get ready for giving me a sense of what you're thinking about, what you're driving towards, and we can do some problem solving together in this room. And then we can talk about how we turn that into opportunity, not just for you and your organization, but for the space and for communities that are not yet a part or are on the outside, that we can then partner with to make sure that we're all on the inside and all dominating. So, going back to it, thinking about the notion of where are the spaces, remember the model, finding a space, a rich space, determining what's missing, and then really engaging with a model that works to create an opening for people to come in to understand how it works and to make money and to drive and to thrive and all those pieces. So who's coming at me first with a problem and a challenge you think about in terms of diversity? We're gonna go here because you're
Hi.
Hi. I'm gonna step down and kill the person with the camera.
Hi, I'm 5-Star. I'm a producer and director, mostly for Kink.com. Now with a lot of analytics and clicks and numbers measuring what is successful, how I find it actually already popular with people who already have a lot of exposure. What is a good argument for diversity when there's so much emphasis on analytics and numbers?
And so I'm curious about the raw numbers or also trend lines that are not helping.
Well, honestly, there's not a lot of numbers that I have, but yeah.
Okay. So I'm making up. So I think it really is about, if you think about the raw numbers, you may have a challenge, right? Because established audiences are automatically going to outrank those that are nascent. So you need to think about how do you think about growth rates, how do you drive growth rates? Because again, we talked about before, particularly for these platforms, people over-index. Here's your big problem. This is going to be a stereotype, so close your ears. Some communities are more inclined to share things like passwords and logins than others. And so you may have a huge number of people, that's your measure, but you should still have your viewing hours growing up and up and up because 12 people use the same password. But the notion of thinking about how you look at trends and growth and directional indicators as opposed to just the raw baseline is going to be a critical space for that. The other side of that is thinking about, how do you understand the bias in data? Right, there are huge biases in data. My best friend, who has a different complexion, a darker complexion than I do, we were together for brunch on Sunday, and she finally bought a new iPhone. It's taken her forever, and not the, 84. but just like, an 8. And she said the facial recognition won't open for her. It doesn't register her skin tone. Right? So imagine how many people aren't being counted just because of the dynamic of the data that we have is so skewed and so biased that if we don't examine its collection, its analysis, and the underlying bias in it, we're just going to be tripped up. Right? Somebody's making money, right? And so the thing is how do you make sure it's you? Next.
It gets harder and harder to talk to companies about diversity and have them actually listen to us. We have companies that, as performers, that we've been reaching out to who portray a certain level of diversity, but it's really not. How do we get them to listen without having to be really public about it and call them out?
Yeah. So I grew up, and this is my long story, so get ready. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia in the 70s. Thank you so much. All right, so I grew up in Atlanta in the 70s in the shadow of the civil rights movement. And my godfather was Ralph Abernathy, a civil rights leader. And so in learning about, and Ralph Abernathy brought Martin Luther King Jr. into the movement in Montgomery, and Martin Luther King Jr. died in his arms on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. And there was this very clear sort of separation of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X for a very long time. Although Martin Luther King Jr. was an agitator and was on the outside, he became to be perceived as his insider. And Malcolm X was always this outsider who, interestingly, as time grew on, grew more interested in negotiating on the inside. So they were sort of coming together and almost living apart from each other. But the thing that I learned in college around social change movements is in order to have power at the table, there have to be people outside threatening to bang down the door. So every seat is valuable, including the ones on the picket line, and including the ones at the table in the boardroom, right? So I think it's about that tension of making sure there are folks who are a little more loud and a little more willing to sort of blow up their spot, so they'll talk to you. But then the notion is you can talk to me, or I can clear out of here because what they're gonna do, I don't want to witness, right? So I'm gonna clear out and good luck to you all. So I think it's that creating that tension is critically important. But the other side is, because of my tenure now, 13 years around the entertainment space and trying to move the dialogue for people of color, I've seen the success that people have had, and the name that is just the poster child, and usually her face was Shonda Rhimes, was her first deal. She created a pilot, took all sorts of notes from the script. She says what came back was something that was not funny and was not her. And the ABC deal disintegrated. Then Larry Wilmore came back and picked her up for this HBO deal. And then that has allowed her to flourish, right? With Insecure as her TV show, a long string of movies, Color Creative is her production company that creates stuff that's not with her in it. Issa Rae Productions has her in it. So there's an industry of Issa Rae that rose up out of that. And I tell that story because, again, it is the grassroots piece that has given her power and the analytics that she can go back to and say, look, I got an audience, right? And in some cases, educating that audience on what needs to be done to make a case for their art and the commerce, such that you have them being the ones storming the gates to say, if this company doesn't give it to me, I'm going somewhere else.
Can I
Yes.
add to that as well? I understand the sensitivity too, because we have a problem across multiple issues in this industry where performers and talent don't necessarily want to be the ones to speak up about issues because it jeopardizes their income stream, and they're very worried about being that voice because then no one will hire them and they won't get work. But there are organizations. We have Free Speech Coalition, we have APAC, we have other groups that will be that voice for them. So I encourage you also to reach out to these organizations, to us. We are actively trying to amplify your voices in this specific area. And Lotus, of course, who works with us at FSC, is a leader in this space and an advocate for all of you.
Other challenges, other spaces. Yes, sir. I'm coming back to you out of the light to completely ruin the shot.
How do you, in your efforts to promote diversity, ensure that you're also including Hispanics and Asians and the LGBT community in the imagery being used on slides, for example. I didn't see, maybe I missed it. Some of these other, sectors, how do you bring them into the mission? Because I assume that you get more numbers and more passion and more voice. How do you include the full spectrum of diversity?
Thank you. And so in terms of the commentary, in terms of what I represent and what Black House represents, we have always been unapologetically Black.
Gotcha.
Mainly because that's our lens, right? And so we don't want to appropriate anybody else's story. Our goal is to tell our story and to be an example in the same way that the Career Lounge was an example for us. And then I was like, wait, and the gender problem, right? There are people who are non-binary. So am I confining to that? So I think that was the challenge that I went into. Be prepared to be disappointed. I put a picture of the CEO in instead. Can you guess what the identity is of the CEO?
White man.
White man, yes. Right? So I sold out. No, but the story for me there was this notion of let me tell my truth, but also let me be sensitive to other truths and create spaces for those. And specifically in terms of Black House, what we've done is we've incubated things like Latino Real for 2 years. We have been an inspiration and a partner with Gold House, which is an Asian American organization that's much like ours. And we have tried to create spaces and partnerships for folks to look at us being a big tent, but with a very specific Black focus. We got an email today from Sundance about our websites, our posts, and our app emphasizing accessibility in our venue, right? And so again, it just sort of came to me, goodness, this is a huge challenge. I showed you that picture of the frozen tundra, but it's icy, it's hilly, and it's an old town. How do you address accessibility in this place, right? And what kind of distance are you putting between yourself, this opportunity, and folks who have mobility challenges on this ski slope, right? And so those are things that are important for us to think about and consider. So we need to be authentic in where we are, which is what my message is, but also create a wide berth for other folks to come through and to have their space and to tell their stories authentically is my response. But I appreciate the feedback and the consideration coming to you.
Hey, I'm Allison. I'm the CEO of Kink.com. And as diversity has increased in front of the camera, I've not seen the same thing behind the camera or at the table. How, given that generally speaking there are a lot of cis straight white men in that role, how can they be allies? What should they be doing? What is incumbent upon me as a woman? How do I make it clear that I'm an ally for the young folks coming up? Yeah, how can we help?
Yep, absolutely. And so thinking about that gets us back to that inclusion, and then another word, which is the concept of belonging, right? Creating space for folks. And I think it is lifting up the role models, the few that may be in existence, that people can look to and understand from both sides. So role models are women who are in positions of power and behind the decision-making table, highlighting them in your publications, in your industry, exposure opportunities, but also, and this becomes a challenge, so I'll say it and I'll pull back in this way. Making sure that those people who want to be allies have access to those people, right? So they can understand, how'd you get here? How did people make it difficult for you? And understanding how people made it difficult for them can be instructive for how I can not make it difficult for somebody else. And so my pushback on myself on that is, whenever you find yourself on a predominantly white institution, college campus, and there's one Black professor or one Latino first generation professor, everybody goes to that person. Right? The students go to that person, the administration goes to that person, the staff goes to that person, everybody's going to that person. They need to publish and get tenure, right? They need to succeed. And so you don't want to burden the few with everybody else, which then just goes to say, get some more, right? You need more than one. One is not enough. There's an organization that does college admissions and support called Posse. What Posse does is it goes out and it works to get admissions to selective schools for a number of students of color, and then sends them to that school in a posse. And so they have each other as a resource. I'm on the board of trustees at Brown University, and we have done what we call cluster hiring, which is the same thing, and particularly in the sciences. It's gone out and said, look, we're going to hire faculty of color, we're going to hire several faculty of color so that we're not giving them these burdens in the space and giving them the room to be successful. But this is my thesis, and I talk to clients all the time and say, I'm in Seattle, I can't get black people to come work in Seattle. Or I'm in Minneapolis, and there are not going to be any Latinx people who want to come work here. As an adult, assuming we're lucky enough to be partnered, how many adult friends you think you can have who are not couple friends or friends of your kids? Okay, your parents' kids, your kids' friends' parents. 2, maybe 3, right? And you can't even see them. You don't have time for them. So all you need to know is they're there in town, and you'll never talk to them, and that increases your satisfaction and your comfort level in that space. So thinking about the fact that there are all these geographic constraints and limitations that keep us from creating community and inclusion and belonging, I think in those executive ranks, making sure people know where they are, giving them the access to tell them how to be better allies and how to, if you can't be an ally, how not to be an enemy. Right? That's a real thing. But also for those mainstream leaders to think about their own vulnerabilities. Right? And this is my other 18th long story. I went to sell some training to a company, a big tech company, and was told by the frontline person they didn't buy minority group specific training. And I said to her, this is about inclusion. We want to make sure that the linebacker coder from Iowa, who looks like he is 6'5", because he is, and weighs 300 pounds, but is a master coder, gets a break. And people respect his skill, right? And he fits the bill, white farm boy in every way. But we want him to have an access point in this tech company. She says, I was born on a farm in Central California, right? And I find that just sharing that with people limits their expectations of my capacity and my intelligence, right? And so she said, how can I send 5 people to your program right away? Will you take a credit card? So again, giving her that point of access to it was like a luck of the draw that I picked farming and just made it up, right? But again, the notion that it really connected to her and allowed her to see that the relationship piece and the understanding of the fact that people have no reference point and they need to be surrounded with support gave her an access point to the conversation for more people. Yes, sir?
I just wanted to comment. Your whole presentation is amazing to me because,
well, thank you.
Really quickly, in the 80s, I owned an executive search firm, and it specialized in finding women and minority corporate human resources made between $50,000 and $100,000 a year. And I was born and raised in Seattle, and yes, you can bring. That was one of my goals. I went to New York, where the major corporations were, and I recruited. They became my clients, and they wanted African American people to go from New York to Seattle. So yes, African American people do go to Seattle. You keep using this word diversity and inclusion, which I find amazing because in the 80s I had an environmental consulting engineering firm, and my secretary was an Arab girl. All my engineers were Filipino, and we called it affirmative action. But you're calling it diversity and inclusion. So is it just a misnomer? Is it kind of like P. Diddy? Every 10 years, the word to describe it changes? Because I knew it as affirmative action. What you're saying to me is affirmative action. In fact, I had to do it because most of my clients were private, but the second were government. And if I wanted a government contract, I had to hire. And I looked up, I said, well, I'm African American, my partner was a white girl, white Jewish girl, and my engineers were Asian, and so I was okay. So
first of all, I don't want you to come after me assuming when I use Diddy as the parallel to the transition from affirmative action to diversity and inclusion. But I think you are spot on. I think affirmative action, of course, became a dirty word in America, right? Which was this notion of giving people unfair advantages and unfair chances, despite the fact that there have been so many obstacles in front of them beforehand. So I think for this notion of affirmative action versus diversity and inclusion, in a lot of cases, it's about the numbers, right? So we're fast approaching this notion where we're going to be a majority-minority country, right? And so in that environment, you have to be able to figure out. My favorite quote from somebody was this: if you're thinking about a nation where the majority of the people are oppressed and disadvantaged, this isn't a question about access and opportunity. It's about the sustainability of a democracy. Right? That just can't stand. The majority being held down is the recipe for rebellion. And rebellion is automatically destabilizing. So it is about the language in some ways, but it's also about the shift in the imperative. We're now at a place where, as a demographic shift, and non-white Hispanics become the predominant population, and Asian Americans in cities, and the birth rate in this country is already in place where the majority of babies born in America are children of color. The imperative is here, right? The scary part of this presentation is already here in terms of the relevance and the threats to what we're holding on to. It will be taken away if we don't adjust, right? And the opportunity today is to get ahead of it, and not just to get ahead of it, but to embrace it, to elevate it, and quite honestly, to monetize it. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it.